where he knew in Russia, because of the total chaos, and the communists promoted all sides of the conflict for those 5 years to make sure that railroads did not run, that food could not be grown, that there would be mass starvation, and that for people to stay alive they had to kill and eat their own children, which they did in mass in Russia. And where anybody who was living in 1922 was a participant in murder, well, they didn't exist. Where you bring the whole population down to a point of all being guilty, and so no one can point a guilty finger. Where you destroy all social, all morals, all traditions, all background in a total reign of terror. A reign of terror so horrible that anybody who survived had to participate in it. Now you bring him down to the total common denominator of animal. Notice in our sex education courses, the idea here is that man is only an animal, operated by animal instincts, and should not have any of these ideals and moral concepts to be held about sex. That he is nothing but a dog. When you drive them all down to nothing but animals, they have to be ruled by a herdsman. And they intend to be herdsmen of animals. For animals become so bestial in their conduct they cannot live with each other without having a master. What you do when you break down the morality of a people is create such chaos that they demand a dictator to solve so they can even survive with each other. Take away all morals. Take away restraint. People say, well, I'm against all those thou shalt not. You're negative. I want to tell you the 10 Commandments are negative. The whole Constitution of the United States is negative. All morality is negative as thou shalt not. People who can do whatever they feel is their thing are totally immoral. They're beasts. See, an animal at least has instincts. Man has choice. What an animal does is neither moral or immoral. It cannot be. Because he has no choice over his actions. No matter how violent or cruel his actions may be, they're not moral or immoral by nature. But man, because he has choice, therefore what he does is moral or immoral because he has choice. Man's actions are moral and immoral because of the nature of man. He is not an animal. And what trying to do is reduce people to animal level, and therefore making their actions neither moral or immoral, which creates a total state of chaos which forces the people to demand a dictator. And the division of the family, the destruction of the family in the schools today through the sex education, and the total destruction of the recognition of parents as the primary educator of the youth is designed to the purpose of bringing a population to a level that it has to have a dictator. It can't survive without it. They're going to get you to demand your own masters. That's the intention. Clever, huh? Okay, let's move on a little bit and take up two subjects here, republic and democracy. I will now give the definition of the United States government for democracy until it was changed back in the early 30s. The official definition was, and I quote, the U.S. Army Manual 1928, quote, democracy, the worst form of government possible, always leading to autocracy, tyranny, and slavery. In fact, the Greeks had a name for the leader of a democracy. The name of a leader of a democracy, the proper name, is a tyrant. They first observed democracy in a place called Tyre, and they looked and saw the guy looked just like LBJ, and they said, he's a tyrant. Tyranny is a synonym for democracy. The word has exact same meaning. Democracy is the lynch mob in operation. Democracy says whatever the majority wants it can have, whether it be moral or immoral. All you have to do is get the majority to support it and it's okay. Anything is okay if the majority supports it. If the majority wants to kill, killing's fine. The majority wants to steal, stealing's fine. After all, the majority should rule. Rule who? Oh, rule the minority. Obviously, somebody's got to be ruled. Let's take a look at a democracy in action. We can go back 3,000 years to a fellow named Plato. He had pretty well conned the game. He said, look, how does the executive committee of a democracy get in office? Gets elected. Why do the people vote for them? Because they get something they wouldn't get if they didn't vote for them. How are they going to get that? How is the government going to give to the majority something they didn't have unless the government takes it away from the minority? Therefore, democracy is a process whereby the government induces the majority to rob the minority. And only the biggest thieves can get elected. Notice in the last election, you didn't have any argument for government robbery and against government robbery. You had an argument of who could do it most efficiently. You had the argument that not over policy, but who was best capable of carrying out the policy of stealing. The argument is not anymore over issues, but who can carry out the policy established by the establishment. We'll get into that more later. Okay. I was going somewhere with all that. Okay. I'm on track again. We'll get it. You see this man? He'll never sit in the front row again. I'll guarantee you that. See this fellow here? Some fellow named Locke and a few other people had an idea. That is, they said, how can a man have a right? And what rights can man have and should have? You see, has any man ever had a civil right? No man has ever had one yet, has he? There's not a person in the world today with a civil right. There never will be a person in the world with a civil right. There can never be a person in the world with a civil right, no matter how much you would try. For the two words are contradictory, one to the other. This is why the communists offer the term, because it can't be achieved, therefore agitation is forever. For an example, watch the communist line. This is laid out in 1928 by Stalin's agent, John Pepper, here in the United States. You have two movements. Watch the movements. One is for a separate Negro republic. And they laid out the marches and the whole thing back in 1928, the whole communist program of using the Negro as cannon fodder in the revolution to seize power. But they have another program, and that's integration. Now they push both at the same time. Well, how can that be? And why should it be? Look, that's so nobody could solve the problem. If you say, okay, to the Negro citizens, have your own republic. Oh, you don't want to live next door to us, huh? You say, well, okay, I'll live next door to you. You won't give us our own republic, huh? You can't win. And therefore, it can't be solved. For they're not looking for solutions, they're looking for violence. Violence is what they're after, not solutions. They're not out to solve any problems. They're out to create problems. So that you will have to demand dictators to solve the chaoses created by the problems they have promoted. Civil rights is a total fraud, and always has been. Why? The word civil means created by government. Civil government. Right means something that cannot be taken away, altered, amended, increased, or decreased. Well, look it. If it is a right, it can't be civil. Example. I'm an all-powerful king, and you are my vassals. Therefore, you have no power at all, right? By definition, if I'm all-powerful, you have none. Seeing you have none, none of you have the power to do anything to rule over anybody else. I have the power to rule over all of you. Now, anything I do as an all-powerful king, by definition, is civil. Any pronouncement I make is civil law, isn't it? I am the government. I'm using this as a simple case of the... I know I'm breaking my first rule on monarchy up there, but that's... permit me for the... economists use this as... use a term called ceteris paribus, all things being equal, and this kind of cleans it down. The desert isle and the monarch are excellent ways of getting all the extraneous things cleaned out of here, see? So anyway, here I am. I'm an all-powerful king. And you people have no power at all. Now, let us say I have made no pronouncements at all on religion. Would you, my vassals, have religious freedom? Yes, you would have total religious freedom, wouldn't you? Seeing I have not taken any action to restrict any of your worship, and no one else has the power to do so. Each of you can worship or not worship as you please, can't you? You would have total religious freedom. Is it a right? No. Because tomorrow I could make a pronouncement. Couldn't I? It's not a right. Notice my pronouncements are civil. If I said, you people have the right to worship as you please, do you? No. You have the privilege to worship as you please as long as I don't make a law. But it's not a right because tomorrow I can say, I changed my mind. And today you don't have a right to worship as you please. So therefore it's not a right. It's only a privilege. Our founding father says, how can you make him a right? That was the problem. Not just a privilege. A privilege is something granted to you by an all-powerful government. A right is something owned by the citizen, not created by government, of which government cannot interfere with, and no other man can interfere with. Otherwise, it's not a right. If anybody can interfere with it, it's not a right. If a majority can interfere with it, it's not a right. Notice something. I, as my all-powerful dictator, I've made no rules about religion. You have total freedom. Not a right, a privilege. Is it possible for me to make any law that would increase your freedom? No. Any law, by nature, is a pronouncement of force and regulation on religious freedom, isn't it? Therefore, it must reduce the religious freedom of somebody. Or it wouldn't be a law. Government doesn't create freedom. Government takes away freedom. Now, there are certain freedoms we say government should take away. The freedom to murder. The freedom to steal. These are freedoms that all societies have agreed that people shouldn't have. And so there are certain just things that government has a right, certain just freedoms are right to limit. We'll have to discuss the reasons for those in a few minutes. But let's get back to my case of civil rights. The only way you could have a right, according to our founding fathers, in any area that we wanted to assure liberty was to prevent the government from making a law if it wanted to. To take away from the government the very power to make a law in the area. That's the only way it could be a right. For if the government had the power to make a law, it wouldn't be a right, it's only a privilege. And if they made a law, it's not even a freedom anymore. You lose that too. Notice our Constitution did not say, the government hereby declares the right to freedom of religion. It can't. The Constitution says the government shall make no law to abridge the free exercise of religion. What does it say? Keep your cotton-picking hands out of our religious affairs. It's off limits. And if it is off limits, religious freedom is a natural consequence of the inability of government to make a law governing religion. It isn't something created by government, it's created by the absence of government. Rights cannot be created by government. They're created by the prohibition on government from entering the field. It is the restriction of government that creates a right, and not its presence. Notice our Constitution is a whole list of things the government shall not do, and then they have the beautiful Article 10. This is the lovely article in the book. Article 10. And anything we forgot, you can't do that either. What a great one that is. You see, social problems are never solved by government. They are created by government. Government cannot solve a social problem. It can only create them. It is impossible for government to solve a social problem by the very nature of the institution itself. What then is a just government? And this is where we get to a republic. A republic is a limited government. A government which is restrained from taking action in certain areas of man's affairs. Not a government which says if a majority wants to have the Presbyterian Church to be the state church, they can have it, or 90%. Our Constitution says no. What about 99%? No. 100%? No. Keep your cotton-picking hands out of it. There may come a Shintoist along someday, and even though he isn't here yet, you just keep your hands out of it. We'll decide those things amongst ourselves and by ourselves and between us and our Lord. And they're not to be decided by the state. They're not to be arbitrated in the halls of Congress. They're not to be decided in the courts. They're to be decided in the individual conscience of the citizen and his own personal relation with his Maker. Notice it's not a civil right. It's an unalienable right. Notice it did not say in our Declaration of Independence, we are granted by our government certain civil rights. It says we are granted by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. That means keep your cotton-picking hands out of it. The Communist says we're granted by our government certain civil rights, those of which they're going to give you this week. And you're to trust government for all your handouts, and therefore you're to live as a child. You see, a mature person, when you were a child, you had to do what your parents told you. You know when you get 16 or 17, how smart you get, and how dumb Pop is. And you start telling Pop how to run the show. My Pop had a real good answer for that, and he says, I want to tell you something. When you put your feet under your own table and eat your own food, you run the show. When you eat my grub, I'm right. That's some very basic economics, isn't it? Huh? You can't beat that for reasoning. And if you didn't like that, he had another way out back that he took care of all other little problems. It's called woodshed therapy, and there's nothing wrong with our youth that a little woodshed therapy wouldn't clear up, I'll tell you. That was somewhere before I got into that. Well, talking about those unalienable rights, weren't I? Yes. Well, we wanted to get another one. I'll slip in here while I'm thinking. You know, people talk about the state, and that we got to have a welfare state, which democracy is a welfare state, isn't it? The majority can steal from the minority because it has enough thieves to go along with them. And they say, well, after all, don't you believe in charity? Today we're told that charity is taking away from our neighbor what he has earned for our own self out of compassion for our need. By force. I don't see anywhere in the Bible, and I've read it all the way, from the beginning to the end. I read it very carefully. I was checking for something. I was looking for that passage where Christ said, go thee unto Rome and get thy welfare check. I didn't find it. I never saw where he said, go to the state and find the solutions to your problems. Nowhere. There used to be charity was giving to another out of compassion for his need, out of your own goods, voluntarily. We've lost that concept, haven't we? Well, getting back to my democracy in action. You see this fellow here. You see, he had some rights. Our founding fathers said, unalienable rights. In the original, I like the original text of the Declaration of Independence a little better than the final text, where originally it said, a right to life, liberty, and property. You see, look, what this man earns is property. Now, if his property can be taken away by somebody else at the other person's wish, he is the other person's slave, and the other person is his master. Oh, I know I was getting to with the feet under the table bit. And that was this. That as a child, when you're living off of someone else, that other person is your master, and you'll have a servant relationship. Or with a family, it's a closer deal than that, but it basically is that you are an immature child and have to obey, don't you? Authority. If you want to be mature and to be You have to pay your own way. A person never grows up and becomes mature until he supports himself. That's what's wrong with so many of our college students. They've never earned a dollar. They've never faced a bill. They got all the solutions at the age of 18 for all the problems of the world, and they haven't yet turned their first buck. And I'll tell you, after they get knocking around a little bit, their solutions kind of get worn down. What does democracy create? And the idea that the government is to solve your needs, to provide your food, your clothing, and everything else, that it will solve your needs, and all you need to do is vote for them, not work for them. Now, when you're living off of other people, you must be the slave of who's feeding you. Let's take a look at the feudal system. The feudal lord lived up on the hill. He owned all property. The vassal, the serf, couldn't own any property. He couldn't acquire property, enjoy property, or dispose of property. He had to live where he was told. He had to do as he was told, produce according to his ability, and consume according to his need, as the massa decided the need. He was given security. He was taken care of from the cradle to the grave, wasn't he, by the master? But not liberty. Let's take a look at a Negro slave in the old plantation. He couldn't buy property. He couldn't hold property. He couldn't dispose of property. He had to live where he was told. He was produced according to his ability, and it was given to according to his need. He was given security. He was taken care of from the cradle to the grave, but he wasn't free. Let's take a look at the slave in a Chinese communal farm. He can't acquire property, hold property, or dispose of property. He can't move where he wishes to. He produces according to his ability. He is given to according to his need. He is given security from the cradle to the grave. You see, anyone who's living off their government or living off of somebody else must be that other person's slave. Our founding father said, if you are going to be free, you must be mature. If you are mature, you must live off your own efforts and not off others. Any man who goes out, and you take a look at the Negro population today, are told to go out and become slaves by demanding other people to feed them. That is the road to slavery. You cannot be fed by another and be free of that other. It is nothing but the new plantation that we're being offered. Only now for everybody. Of course, that may make you feel good that everybody else is in the same boat. But really, I'm not interested in being the best informed person in the concentration camp. That isn't my real goal and desire here. So let's take a look at democracy and republic and kind of wrap this up. And I promised Gary Allen I'd go through my little Rome bit. Rome, how we come with that coffee? Have I stalled long enough? Coffee coming? Is the coffee coming, Gary? Okay, I'll wrap this up and we'll get a little coffee. The Romans somehow came up with a republic, a limited government. I don't know how they came up with it, but they did come up with it. They understood the nature of man. Man would like to rule other men. And if man can make money out of ruling, the evil men will enter it. So what they did, they put 12 immutable laws in stone. And these laws had some things like senators couldn't get paid, and they weren't elected. In fact, senators couldn't even wear the gentleman's clothes. They had to meet on a dirt floor on a small stool, barefoot, as they debated the affairs of state. They even went further than this, that no general could keep command of his army more than 1 year. Every year he had to come back to the Senate and put his sword before the Senate. He couldn't come back with his army. He had to come back alone. No army was allowed into Rome. We weren't going to have any men in Ohio. And he had to become a civilian for 1 year. Take a seat in the Senate, and at the end of the year he could ask for his sword back and go back to his army. Somebody else went and took his army the year in between. This kind of kept things from getting out of hand. Anyway, they had a lot of little brilliant ideas like that, see? They had another little one. During times of national crises, they would appoint a dictator because their government was not strong enough to meet national crises. But this dictator could not mount a horse or wear a gentleman's clothes or live in a house. He had to be despised by everybody and looked down upon. What loathsome creature, but obeyed. The reason they wanted to make the job so detestable that nobody wanted it. And it would be happy to give it up as soon as the crisis was over. Pretty sharp people, huh? There's a problem with a republic. You see, the people of Rome could keep what they produced. The government couldn't take it away from them. And any society that has ever allowed the citizens, or I shouldn't say allowed, because no government has ever allowed the citizens to keep what they produced, citizens have either created a society where the government can't take away what they produce, or the government does. Where the citizens did not allow their government to take away their produce, creates a problem. That is, the society becomes vastly wealthy rapidly. In fact, so wealthy that everybody in the world wanted to be conquered by Rome. Roman armies were successful not because of their military prowess, but because the vassals, the serfs in their neighboring nations wanted to lose. Oh, the nobles didn't, but the serfs did. After all, they were living in caves, and Romans had apartment buildings and aqueducts and had everything. And here they're living grovel in the cave, and along come the Romans. Man, that's great stuff. Roman armies, why did a little city conquer the world? The world wanted to be conquered by Rome. They wanted what Rome had. That's why Rome was successful, when you want to really get down to the nitty-gritty of it. I hate that word. I don't know why I use it. Mainly because of a guy I know who uses it. And so here, everything is going along great. Rome was vastly wealthy. As always, notice in our nation, between 1870 and 1930, our total national true product doubled every 8 years. Went up 4 times in 16. Went up 8 times in 24. 16 times in 32. 32 times in 40 years. In 48 years, it went up 64 times. It did this for 60 straight years. No nation in modern recorded history has ever seen anything like it. Why? People could keep what they earned. Very rare in the history of mankind have citizens been able to keep what they earned, or a large share of it. You see, what this man earns is private property. Either he can keep it or it can be taken away by the will of another. If it's taken away by the will of another, he is not free. There are 2 ways, you see, for me to steal this man's goods. One, I put a mask on and say, stick him up. Now, there isn't a society, including the Communist Society, who wouldn't put me in jail for doing that. That's called stealing. But if I vote for this fella, who promises to take it away by force from you and give it to me, I'm now a Democrat. The result is the same, except now I'm stealing legally, and I'm no longer a criminal, but an honorable citizen. If I can get enough people to steal with me, we form a democracy. And now we can steal absolutely immune to all laws. In fact, we make all laws to make the stealing not only legal, but moral. That's called democracy in action. Democracy is only the process where the biggest thieves can get elected, because only the person who promises to steal the most can win. Any promise to steal less isn't going to make it. Well, let's get back to Rome. Things were going along real great for a few hundred years in Rome. Rome was becoming very wealthy and powerful. And the senators said, look, it's not right, you see. Some of the senators are poor, living in hovels, and here, wealthy Rome can afford to put their government in the conditions and standards like governments of other nations. It is terrible to have the Roman Senate living in such conditions. We should have some nice buildings and, for dignity of the state, for the good of the people, of course, you understand, always for the good of the people. Some people said, don't you see those laws? You can't do that. Remember Animal Farm? Those of you who read Animal Farm, they painted on the end of the barn when the animals threw out the man that will run the farm themselves, and they put all the laws on all animals sleep in beds, no animals will live in houses, and all the other things, rules. And they found the great rule at the end was all animals are equal. And finally the pigs, moved in the houses, they're sleeping in the beds, the pigs are taking over everything. And one day the other animals starving, freezing out there, look at the end of the barn, it says, all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. Well, anyway, I said the Senate ought to be paid. They should have some dignity. And people said, oh no, the immutable laws. And they said, well, who made those laws? Why, man made those laws. If man made them, man can change them. And if man made them, then man's government, man rule, democracy, should decide whether they can be changed or not. We should let the people decide. Well, I guess man did make the laws. No, man didn't make the laws. The laws, if they're right because they're right regardless of who made them. If they're wrong regardless of who made them or how they were made. Principle doesn't change because of majority whim. Truth is truth regardless of how many people believe in it. Now I'll tell you something. When you find yourself on the side of the majority, get out. You're wrong. Anytime you find yourself on the side